So it's always a good idea if you're putting a motor in a car, especially in this case with the Mark IV Supra. It's a difficult motor to pull the pan because basically because of the sticky design you need to pull the whole motor out to do the pan. So what I like to do is see if it makes oil pressure, so everything is correct with the oil pickup tube and the oil pump and all that stuff. Very simple with the ELS, of course. We just hook up the wiring harness to the starter and we run it. Check if everything is correct, and there you can see it's filling up the filter over there. It would be even nicer to hook up a sensor and to check for the oil pressure, but in this case with a couple spins it's already putting so much oil in the canister that it's going to be all right. And it's super important to get the clearance correct between the pan and the oil pickup. There you can tell we have the whole filter is full with just a little spin, so that's pretty good. It's not the filter that we're going to use, of course, but it's the lines that we're going to be using and that whole setup. So yeah, so that's kind of nice to know that that's working before you put the motor all the way in the car, because if you find out that the oil pickup isn't correct or it doesn't make any oil pressure, you have the whole thing in the car. Like on my V8 car, it would be kind of easy to pull the pan, but with the Supra, there's a subframe over here, there's a subframe over there. It just kind of sucks to pull the motor. Basically anything you have to do on the motor, even pull the heads when it's in the Mark IV Supra is difficult. So check all that stuff before you put it in the motor. So kind of happy. Let's put the motor in the car. So putting a motor in now isn't difficult. We made some changes to the subframe. We made some changes to the sticky mounts, which were completely useless to start with, but now we made them fit. Motor sits really nicely. There's very little room here at the pan. It needs to tilt back a little bit. It's like kind of like hanging on the pan right now, but as you can tell, it's gonna tilt backwards like a couple degrees. That's the only way that's ever gonna fit, and that's after we modified the sticky mounts. Like, you cannot use the sticky mounts at all the way they come. It's completely wrong. And the green, like the actual vibration dampers, are total trash. You should never use them. We really regret actually getting any sticky parts for this car, but that's life. Lesson learned, never again. It just sucks if you buy swap parts and it doesn't fit at all. Kind of defies the point, so we should have made it ourselves. It looks nice and billet, but it's just completely wrong dimensions. But yeah, we got the motor in place, and that's kind of cool. Now it's easy, and like I said, we had to modify the subframe, so it looks like it's in the stock position, but we had to change the subframe so it actually fits. Yeah, so now we're going to check out what the best way is to put the bell housing and transmission on the car, because this is the whole problem right here, that this oil pan is so close to the steering rack that you can't really drop the engine much lower. Like, it should have been a different design pan, so the engine sits a little lower, because that way you can actually fit the bell housing in the transmission. There you can see our solution for the lines for the heater, which we are moving into this area over here, because it doesn't clear at all. Like, the only way to run them differently was over there, but then you're right in front of the vehicle's fin, which I didn't want to do. That's a throttle cable. That's our stainless steel clutch cable. Yeah, so kind of cool. We're checking out throwout bearing clearance over here, because the throwout bearing needs to have the correct distance. So what you're doing is you're putting a ruler across from here, and then there's tons of videos about it. We also have one. You basically want to know how far the fingers of the pressure plate are going to be away from the throwout bearing. This is just a clutch that came with the car, and later we'll swap it out for something more beefy, but it's just for proof of concept to see. These things, like, you can take them apart. If you press this and you twist it, then you can tell how deep it will go in.
I've actually already done that. You need 2 hands and stuff for that, so I didn't film it. And like I said, there's tons of videos about it, like on the T56 Slave. And you want to measure how much the depressed distance is between the edge of the transmission and the so you would basically measure this, but of course you use a ruler to put that across from here to here. Just put a ruler over there. Then you measure this distance and how much difference it makes when this thing is fully depressed over here, and you'll end up with the following thing. The bell housing, so the first thing I showed you, to the pressure plate is 58 millimeter. The transmission edge to the throwout bearing all the way extended is 60 millimeter. It depresses 24, so you end up with a distance of 36. The actual distance is going to be 58, so we need to fill up 22 millimeter, but you want to have a little bit of air gap because the fingers of the pressure plate are going to start moving out when the clutch wears out. So we take 4 millimeters for that, so you'll end up with an 18 millimeter spacer, which is going to go between the face of the transmission over here and the throwout bearing. So this is going to get spaced up 18 millimeter, so there's going to be a correct spacing between the throwout bearing and the pressure plate. Here you can see our transmission mount that we made. I'm super happy that it all mounts up really nicely. It's a very weird gearbox to fit. As you can see, I had to put I had to like shim it out over here to make it 100% on the trajectory of the engine, because as you can see over here, it's not straight. So the engine is sitting straight in the car, obviously, but the bell housing is tilted slightly to the left, so the whole transmission is sitting to the left. That's just the way they are. You can also tell from the shifter mechanism that that's what it's like, but it's very difficult, of course, with fitting all these parts and making mounts and all that shit. You can see I also clearanced a little bit over here for the lines and also to do some inspections. So I drill a hole over here and then I cut it out there so that these lines have a little bit of more room, especially if you're moving the throwout bearing forward. It's possible that you run out of room, like it's going to fit, but it's going to be extremely tight. So as you can see now, they're hitting over here and they're going to be 18 millimeters forward. So there's also really nice fancy aftermarket ones that have adjustability in the throwout bearing themselves, but that's not this one. As you can see, it was actually a lot of work to find that adapter because there's tons of different throwout bearings. We found that adapter to a -4 line, so now we're dash lines on both. And this actually came with the car remote bleeder, which is something that you really want on these things. It sucks ass to bleed these things in the car. Like hydraulic throwout bearing is super difficult to bleed anyways. Always grab a new one and always get the remote bleeder. So that's a spacer, and it's gonna sit behind, and this is an old one, but it's gonna sit behind the throwout bearing just like that, spacing that out. Obviously you need to grab longer bolts as well, but that's the idea. So that's the thickness that we calculated, minus a couple millimeters of clearance. And starting to look like an engine again. We have the headers in on both sides, which is very difficult because I think this is the only right-hand drive LS swap Supra, at least the only one with long tubes, because we made pretty serious exhaust manifolds in case a client wants to upgrade to bigger heads or something. So I wanted them to be 1/7/8, and as you can see, it's very close fit everywhere. It's really like the Sicky pan is like the worst idea ever. It's basically voiding everything that you want to do, because you want the motor to be about 1/2 inch further forward and 1/2 inch lower, but that's not possible at all due to the pan. So we had to make a ton of modifications just because that pan is incorrect. And there's a lot of small stuff going on, of course, here. The remote oil filter, which we got, like maybe some of you guys have seen the small filter that we had on it before, but now we have a really tall filter and they run all the way down there. It's a little hard to see. Let me add a little light. So there you can see that's where the oil lines are going. Nice. I always like, there's always budgets with everything, and in this case In this case, obviously, we didn't put like different heads on it or cams or whatever. And as you can see, it's still like the original water pump that came with the motor. I checked all that stuff, of course, but we did spend good on like the things that are critical, like for instance, power steering line over here, like a nice braided line, because if something fails over here, it's going to spill on the header. Same with the oil lines, like you don't want to have any problems over there. So we converted the power steering pump, as you can see, to AN over here. And yeah, everything on the car that we could convert to dash or AN, that's what we've done. And I'm really happy with the clutch setup. Like, it's all really close by here. As you can see, that's the original cylinder, and it's moving over there until the bulkhead. We need to pull it up a little bit more because it's really close to the header and the remote bleeder. And now it's like incredibly nice clutch action. Seems that we got it totally right with the clutch bearing distance. Super smooth action. Yeah, and there's a lot of things that you guys may like over here. That's where the fuel comes in, goes to the fuel filter, and that's on the other side where the fuel exits the engine bay again. So and over there you can see that we had to go to the bulkhead, because if we put the intake manifold on, you can see that there's no room for anything over here. Just behind the motor in front of the bulkhead, there's no space at all. So we had to find a way to incorporate those fuel lines in and out. And of course, I always use a returning system over here. Just like standard for us. We always have a system with a returning rail. We never run the factory rail. And here's a super nice radium fuel pressure regulator that you guys have seen from other episodes. Again, braided lines, like it's not the cheapest solution, but they're very light and they're extremely flexible compared to the AN lines that you make yourself. Nice benu over here, and that's all because there's just no room over there. So you couldn't even fit a 90-degree AN on any fuel rail, so that was very difficult to do. But now it's all done and ready. And as all you guys know, I like gauges, and this is a analog gauge for the fuel pressure, because LSs are very extremely sensitive to fuel pressure. Yeah, so that's the thing that's going to go on. And we have the headers on the car now, radiator, but it's all been mocked up. So now it literally took me just an hour to put all the ancillaries on. Of course, a new belt, of course, new plugs in there, engine case, R55s that we run in there, which is like my preferred plug for LSs. And as you can see, there's a nice room for the plugs to come out. Let's see how this light works. Yeah, so it's always important to me that it's kind of easy to get the plugs out and get the ignition leads on and all that stuff. So yeah, so she's coming along nicely, guys. Hopefully started tomorrow. As you can see with the V8 conversion, the headers are going to be pretty close to the frame rails, and on that side it's even worse because the car is not symmetrical. Like for instance, that's where the fuel filter was, but we need all that space for the header to pass through. And here where you can see this brake line, that's where the fuel lines also were sitting. So it was like really close because we have the exhaust passing through right over there, so I didn't want to have it that close. So we went into the brake and made a piece over here, which has a bunch of holes in it. Some of those holes are made to attach it to the body right over here, and the other ones are holding a clamp, a hose P-clamp in over here, as you can see. And that's how that whole piece basically holds up the fuel line. It's very rigid, extremely strong, because it's has a little edge on it, which also means that there's no way that line is ever going to fall off, and it follows the shape of the floor really nicely. So that's a nice way to move the fuel line outside. Here we moved it over here again because there's no way. People said like, oh, but it's in the wheel well. We're going to make a shield for this, don't you worry about a thing. It's not the first time we're building a car over here, but you can't go on that side, because if you move with the fuel over there, you need to pass through, and the header is like really close to here. Like the header is like an inch away from here, because we want to run big headers on this car in case we want to do heads or whatever in the future. So that's our solution for that. And there you can see this brown stuff, by the way, is anti-corrosion. It's not rust. because we put riv nuts in there, as you guys have seen, because we were going to work with the little plates first, but now I decided for this piece. And here you can see how it works with the P-clamps holding the line in place. And that's both sides of that piece installed. Yeah, happy with it. And yeah, it's always really funny because this is not a really thick piece, but it's like so incredibly sturdy just because it's been in the brake. Really cool.
So this wasn't really easy making the shifter mechanism because it's a completely different way of suspending. I made some bushings over here which are actually rubber, and we're going to be suspending the mechanism like this. We're going to make a plate that's going to cover this and bolt on these things, and that's going to hold this base plate in position. It does shift pretty well, I have to say. It's a little difficult to do because I need to hold the plate up, but yeah, that's working really nicely. Really nice feeling to there, even with this plate being loose. Engages all the gears, and I'm really happy that the clutch also has a really nice light operation. That's also been a lot of work to shim that correct and get that right. People really don't realize how much work all this stuff is before it functions well, because the Tremec also sits at an angle, so it's super difficult to get that right, because the car is of course straight, so you want a stick to sit nice and straight, but it also has to engage in all the gears and stuff, and it's completely different location than the standard position that this transmission has. So it's about almost 14 centimeters in a different location. So we had to shorten the whole bracket, but the bracket is straight. It has all kinds of angles and things, so you're changing everything when you're changing the length of the brackets. But we've got it done. But this, like, just for your information, this is just like 8 to 9 hours work to make the mechanism and to make it work.
Don't forget to take a look at our website as well, einzel.nl. We ship worldwide, of course, Wisefab, field suspension, our own brand Einzel, gearboxes, quick change differentials, axles, all kinds of things. A lot of fabrication components, of course, air jacks, subframes for quick change, you name it. Drop us an email and we'll hook you up.